A woman, 3 children, gunshots in the middle of the night, and a story so twisted it still sends chills down the spine. That night in 1983, something inside Diane Downs' car shattered forever the fragile line between motherhood and monstrosity. She showed up at the hospital covered in blood, yet eerily calm. What seemed like another tragic family incident quickly unraveled into a maze of obsession, cold calculation, and carefully constructed lies. How could a mother shoot her own children? And why? Was it love, rejection, insanity, or something even darker? Today you'll hear every detail of this disturbing crime that stunned the United States and still echoes through the darkest corners of female psychopathy. Get ready, because Diane Downs' sins weren't forgotten, only buried beneath a mask of innocence. Welcome to Urban Hauntings, where we dive deep into mysteries, true crime, and paranormal stories with intensity and depth. If this content speaks to you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and share it with others who love eerie and real-life mysteries. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's begin today's chilling tale. In the Downs household, the windows were always shut. Silence ruled the rooms, and fear was a constant guest. Diane was born in 1955 in Arizona, into a home shaped by religious rigidity and appearances that masked painful truths. Behind the prayers and neatly set dinner table, dark secrets simmered like iron on fire. At 12 years old, Diane confided that her father had molested her. From that moment, the world stopped feeling safe. Religion suffocated more than it protected. Her father, stern, deep-voiced, and obsessed with rules, dictated the household rhythm with Bible verses and punishments. Her mother, submissive and withdrawn, turned a blind eye to the cracks in their foundation. Diane grew up torn between the Bible and silent suffering, between repression and a pain no one dared name. She began to see herself as broken, out of place, but no one noticed. To outsiders, she was just another smiling girl. Her teenage years ignited rebellion. At 14, Diane met Steve Downs, a free-spirited boy with defiance in his eyes. Their romance became an escape, a quiet rebellion against everything she'd ever known. Her parents despised him. The more they pushed back, the more she clung to him. Steve came to symbolize everything Diane longed for: freedom, no guilt, and no God. But their love was never healthy. It was toxic, impulsive, and filled with fights. Diane used her body as currency, offering what she could in exchange for attention. It wasn't love. It was a desperate need to matter to someone. Eventually, Steve joined the Navy. Alone again, Diane's abandonment turned into anger, a cold, silent, dangerous kind of rage. When Steve returned, Diane had made up her mind. She wouldn't be ignored again. She convinced him to marry her, even though hesitation lingered. The wedding was simple, almost mechanical. Despite their youth, the emotional gap between them was massive. Diane believed marriage would heal her scars, but all it did was bury them deeper. The trauma never left. It just hid beneath the surface. And that's how the story began. A woman shaped by abuse, neglect, and a series of painful choices. But no one, not even Steve, could have imagined what Diane, with her empty stare, would one day be capable of. An emotional time bomb was ticking, and when it went off, the world would witness the sins of a mother. Diane and Steve's marriage was never a safe haven. From the start, they clashed like strangers forced to share the same roof. Their fights were constant, fueled by jealousy, distrust, and bottled-up resentment. Diane, emotionally unstable, swung between needy affection and icy detachment. Steve, growing increasingly distant, slowly faded from the relationship, and in the middle of all that chaos came the children. To Diane, motherhood felt like emotional glue. She believed having kids would strengthen her bond with Steve, or at least fill the void inside her. But each pregnancy seemed less like a choice and more like an escape. When the children were born, Diane showed little interest in caring for them. Crying annoyed her. Diapers frustrated her. She played the part of a mother, but the soul of it was missing. Neighbors began noticing. The children cried for hours without comfort, while Diane locked herself in silence or disappeared for long drives alone. At home, she bounced between harsh discipline and emotional indifference. Steve, exhausted, tried to intervene, but their marriage was already crumbling. The image of a nurturing mother, It had never existed. The children grew up in a home shadowed by neglect and emotional tension. Even as the relationship collapsed, Diane became pregnant again. It was as if repeating the cycle gave her some sense of control. But to her, the kids weren't symbols of love anymore. They were obstacles, things that kept her from being desired, admired, and free. That feeling only intensified when Steve finally filed for divorce. For Diane, it was yet another unforgivable rejection. After the divorce, Diane plunged into a series of short-lived relationships, always chasing validation. But in every one of them, a pattern emerged. The men didn't want kids. Determined not to lose those fragile connections, she began hiding or downplaying her role as a mother. To her, the children became a burden, something to avoid or get rid of. Motherhood became a performance. She smiled in public, but at home, she was cold, distant, absent. Her detachment began to show more clearly, but few could see how deep the cracks ran. For the children, life with Diane felt like walking on thin ice, and eventually, the ice broke. Steve's rejection felt like salt on an open wound. Diane couldn't stand being left behind, let alone replaced. To her, the end of their marriage wasn't just a breakup. It was a personal attack on her worth as a woman, and that wound never healed. It turned into a need, an emotional hunger that pushed her from man to man, desperately searching for a reflection of a love she had never known. The relationships Diane began to pursue were marked by imbalance and manipulation. Some of the men were married, others were emotionally unavailable, but in every case she dove in with an obsessive intensity, trying to secure affection at any cost. The presence of her children, however, was always a problem. They reminded her of the past, of rejection, and stood in the way of the new identity she was trying to create. It was during this unstable phase that Diane got pregnant again, this time by a man who made it clear he didn't want any ties. Instead of ending the pregnancy or embracing motherhood with maturity, she chose a different route, becoming a surrogate. It was a way of using her body to feel useful, or maybe to retain control over something in a life that felt like it was constantly slipping through her fingers. But the psychiatric exam required for the surrogacy program revealed something disturbing. Diane was rejected. The evaluators considered her emotionally unfit for the role. Still, just like in every other area of her life, she found a loophole. Later, she was accepted into a different program and carried the pregnancy to term. The baby, as planned, was given up for adoption. One more broken bond added to a growing list of discarded connections. During this period, Diane held a steady job at the post office, which gave her some financial security. But inside, she was a silent whirlwind. Her romantic frustrations mounted. Her children were growing and demanded attention she refused to give. And the rage that had formed in adolescence began to find new targets. It was no longer her father. It wasn't the church anymore. It was anyone who got in the way of her need to feel loved. This emotional spiral had no brakes. To society, she appeared as a hard-working, independent woman. But behind the smile, there was a dangerous emptiness. Diane Downs wasn't just emotionally unstable. She was standing on the edge of a line she was about to cross. And once she did, the tragedy would spare no one. On the night of May 19, 1983, the Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon, witnessed a scene no one would ever forget. Diane Downs walked into the emergency room alone, her shirt stained with dried blood, her eyes wide. Inside her car were 3 children, 2 gravely injured, 1 already dead. The silence among the doctors was shattered by sirens and the hurried footsteps echoing through the hallway. And something about that mother felt off. She spoke in a soft, almost serene tone. She told the doctors she had been attacked by a strange man on a deserted road. According to her, the man shot the kids, and shot her too. But her wound was superficial. A single bullet to her left arm with no major damage. While the doctors fought to save the children, Diane's coldness was impossible to ignore. No tears, no shaking, no panic. The victims were her own children. Cheryl, 7 years old, was already dead. Danny, just 3, had been shot in the back and was now paralyzed from the waist down. Christy, 8 years old, was clinging to life with a gunshot wound to the head. Even in her critical state, the doctors noticed something in Christy's eyes. Terror. A fear that didn't seem aimed at a stranger. Still, Diane stuck to her version, as if recounting a routine event. Police were called immediately. Diane's story raised questions right from the start. Why would a mother be driving with her 3 small children on a remote road late at night? Why were there no signs of struggle inside the car? And why did her wound appear to have been fired at close range, from an angle reachable only by someone behind the wheel? Investigators smelled something rotten. And it wasn't just the dried blood on the seat. That night, something more than a family had broken. It was the shattering of the idealized image of motherhood. While officers gathered evidence, Diane watched, like someone observing a movie she wasn't part of. Her calm demeanor was disturbing. She smiled, she made odd, out-of-place remarks, as if she hadn't just lived through every mother's worst nightmare. And there, under the hospital's cold fluorescent lights, began one of the most chilling investigations of the 1980s. Detectives had no hard evidence yet, just a growing list of questions, and a gut feeling that this woman was hiding something. Soon the mask would begin to slip, and the road where everything had happened would become the scene of a haunting recreation. From the start, detectives sensed something was off with Diane's account. She claimed she was driving down an isolated road at night when a hooded man flagged her down. Curious, she said she stopped. Then, without warning, he opened fire. But the question hanging in the air was inescapable. What kind of mother takes her young children out for a late-night drive down a deserted road? For no clear reason? Forensics only deepened the suspicion. There were no signs of a struggle inside the car. No skid marks. No footprints. No sign of the alleged attacker. The blood on the seats indicated the shots were fired from extremely close range, too close to have come from outside the vehicle. And the most unsettling part? Diane had driven to the hospital slowly, despite her children bleeding out in the back seat. She had plenty of time to speed, but she didn't. Investigators also noticed glaring inconsistencies in every retelling of her story. Sometimes she said the man threatened her. Other times he appeared out of nowhere. The weapon used? That changed too, depending on Diane's mood. And through all the questioning, Diane didn't seem devastated by her daughter's death. She seemed irritated, more upset about being doubted than about her child being gone. The team decided to retrace the route Diane had described. They followed every curve, every mile, looking for anything to support her story. But they found nothing. No shell casings, no witnesses, no tire marks. Just darkness and silence. Every clue pointed to the same conclusion. Diane had been alone that night, alone with her kids, alone with a decision that would change everything. Meanwhile, Diane began acting more and more strangely. She gave interviews to local media with a smile on her face, describing the night's events as if she were telling a funny story. At one point, she even mimicked the supposed gunman's gestures with a quiet giggle, as if the whole thing were made up. To the detectives, her cold demeanor spoke louder than any physical evidence. With each contradiction, the noose tightened. Diane's story began falling apart right in front of the investigators and the public. And then came the question no one dared to say aloud. What if the monster that night wasn't a stranger on the road, but the mother behind the wheel? The turning point came when detectives found what appeared to be the first pieces of the puzzle: gunpowder residue on the steering wheel. A clear sign that the shots had been fired from inside the car. Even more damning, the murder weapon was a .22 caliber pistol, and Diane owned one. Although she denied having it with her that night, the shell casings found at the scene matched her registered firearm. Ballistic analysis was ruthless. The markings on the bullets removed from the children's bodies had unique patterns, the same patterns left by rounds Diane had fired at a shooting range weeks earlier. On top of that, witnesses came forward saying they had seen her practicing regularly. The image of a helpless, unarmed mother was gone. She knew how to use the weapon, and she knew how to shoot accurately. Another key clue came from an unexpected place: her personal diary. Torn out pages and scribbled lines revealed more than feelings. They exposed motives. Diane had fallen into an obsessive relationship with a coworker at the post office. A man who, according to records, had ended things with her because he didn't want children. The motive for the crime began to rise like oil in water. Her children were obstacles to the love she so desperately idealized. In her writings, she left disturbing, ambiguous phrases like, "He said he can't love a woman with kids, but I can change that." And in another, "Love requires sacrifice." Investigators read those lines over and over, chills running down their spines. Every sentence confirmed the growing theory. Diane wasn't a victim. She was the cold, calculating perpetrator, without remorse. Police also discovered that Diane had told different versions of the story to different people. To some co-workers, it was a robbery. To others, revenge. Her narrative shifted depending on who she was talking to, as if she were testing which lie sounded most believable. But one thing never changed. There was always an outside enemy, a mysterious intruder. She never once accepted responsibility for anything. With ballistic evidence, the damning diary, conflicting accounts, and her disturbingly calm behavior, Diane's image as a grieving mother crumbled in the public eye. What once seemed like an inexplicable family tragedy had taken a darker shape, a crime fueled by rejection, ego, and obsessive love. And by now, only one voice could uncover the full truth, the voice of the child who survived. Christy Downs, just 8 years old, had survived a gunshot to the head. She spent weeks suspended between life and death, unable to speak, to move, or even fully comprehend what had happened. Doctors weren't sure if she would ever walk again, or even communicate. But what no one could have expected was that when she finally did speak, her words would hold the key to one of the most shocking crimes in American history. During recovery, Christy began making sounds, small gestures, responding with her eyes. She would tremble every time Diane entered the room. It wasn't just trauma, it was raw panic. Doctors and psychologists noticed it immediately. This wasn't a child who had witnessed something scary. This was a child terrified of her own mother. With time, patience, and therapy, Christy slowly began forming phrases. And one day, with a trembling voice, she said the words no one wanted to believe. "Mommy shot us." The revelation hit like lightning. This wasn't a theory. This wasn't circumstantial evidence. This was the direct testimony of a surviving victim. And more than that, a child. The jury, the police, the media, everyone was stunned. Up to that point, Diane had continued to smile on the news, claiming her innocence, dancing around the truth. But now, the truth had a name and a voice. Prosecutors knew Christy's testimony would be difficult, not just because of her age, but because of the deep psychological scars. Still, they made the decision to bring her to court. There, in front of dozens of strangers, and her own mother, Christy repeated what she had told her therapists. She said she remembered the car parked on the road. She saw the gun. She felt the pain. And even while injured, she saw her mother pull the trigger, without hesitation. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. The defense tried to discredit the testimony, claiming trauma, confusion, or suggestibility. But Christy's eyes were steady, and her pain, it couldn't be faked. The words that left her mouth carried more truth than any technical report. For the first time, the trial stopped being about evidence. It became about something deeper, a shattered bond between mother and daughter, about the most primal pain a human being can endure, being hurt by the one who was supposed to protect you. It was there, in that cold courtroom, that Diane's public image completely crumbled. The jury no longer saw a fragile woman. They saw a cold figure staring at her daughter. No tears, no emotion. And even with her weak, hesitant voice, Christy had torn off Diane Downs' final mask. From that moment on, there was no turning back. As she awaited trial for murder and attempted homicide, Diane did something that shocked even the most seasoned prosecutors. She got pregnant. That's right. Despite being accused of shooting her own children, she decided to bring another life into the world. Why? She said she missed being loved. It was as if she were trying to replace the children she lost. Or perhaps, deep down, she believed that a new baby might sway public opinion in her favor. The news of her pregnancy was met with outrage. The father was a random man, briefly involved with Diane, with zero emotional connection. The media exploded. Headlines flooded the news. Mother accused of killing her children is pregnant again. The public was horrified. But Diane seemed unfazed, walking through the courtroom with her belly growing and her stare ice cold. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't show remorse. She just existed. During the trial, Diane's behavior was disturbing. Instead of showing guilt or sadness, she cracked jokes, rolled her eyes, and flirted with journalists. Her indifference when shown pictures of her shot children left the entire courtroom speechless. Psychiatric experts began to propose deeper possibilities: narcissistic personality disorder, psychopathy, or both. Prosecutors painted her as a manipulator, charming at first glance but deeply dangerous. They used her own diary as proof that the crime had been premeditated. She sacrificed her children for love, they said. The defense tried to portray Diane as unstable, but not a killer. It was a weak strategy, especially after Christie's testimony, which still echoed through the halls. When the verdict came down, it was final: life in prison plus 50 years. The judge made it crystal clear: Diane posed a permanent danger to society and should never again have access to children. She was handcuffed in front of cameras, her pregnant belly visible. A paradoxical, almost cruel image. Life growing inside someone condemned for taking innocent lives. The baby was born while Diane was already behind bars. The child was immediately placed for adoption and given a new name, Jennifer. But her biological mother's past would follow her like a silent shadow. To Diane, it was just another chapter. But to those following the case, it was the height of distortion. A woman who didn't know how to love, but kept creating lives just to fill her own emptiness. 4 years after being convicted, Diane Downs proved she still wasn't done shocking the world. In July 1987, she added another dark twist to her story. She escaped from prison. The Oregon Women's Correctional Center was stunned when they realized Diane had slipped through a fence during the night. The alarm sounded too late. The woman who had murdered her daughter and nearly killed her other 2 children was on the loose, and no one knew where she was. The news spread fast. TV stations cut into programming. Search teams were mobilized. Armed officers patrolled suburban neighborhoods. Helicopters hovered above. Panic set in. Because Diane wasn't just another escapee. She was manipulative, cold, and had a violent past involving children. The United States was watching a nightmare come back to life. 10 days of fear. 10 days with one question haunting everyone. What is she planning? Run to another state? Try to reclaim Jennifer, the baby born in prison? Get revenge on those who put her behind bars? Eventually, Diane was found hiding at the home of a former co-worker, a man who claimed he'd been emotionally manipulated by her. There was no resistance. She walked out in handcuffs, smiling, like the star of some grotesque performance. Authorities had no patience for her stunt. Her already heavy sentence was extended by 5 more years for the escape, and this time she was transferred to a maximum security prison, with tighter cells and constant surveillance. Any chance of future privileges, like parole, became even more distant. The justice system had closed every loophole. No more chances for someone who had crossed every imaginable line. Inside the new prison, Diane was kept under close observation by psychologists and officers. Reports described her as calm, but highly manipulative. She never admitted guilt. She never expressed remorse. And each time she told her story, she changed the details, always twisting the narrative to make herself the victim. To Diane Downs, the crime was no longer a tragedy. It had become a story, a version she could reshape for every audience. Diane's escape wasn't just a scandal. It was a warning. It showed the system that she wasn't just dangerous. She was unpredictable. And in response, the authorities tightened her isolation. Diane Downs was no longer just the woman who destroyed her own family. She was also the inmate who tried to escape accountability. But the chains of justice had closed in tightly, and she would never see freedom again. Even behind bars, Diane Downs never fully disappeared from the spotlight. In fact, it often seemed like she craved it. Whenever she had the chance, she granted interviews to newspapers and television networks. But her public appearances weren't meant to clarify anything. They were meant to disturb. Every answer she gave was full of contradictions, bizarre phrasing, and a forced calm that chilled the blood. It was like watching someone perform their own madness, or desperately trying to convince the world of a lie that no longer held up. In one of her most infamous interviews, Diane smiles while recounting the night of the crime. She mimics the gunshots, gestures casually as if gossiping about a neighbor, not describing a massacre. The reporter challenges her, but she dodges with vague responses, questions of her own, and vacant stares. The audience watched, mesmerized and horrified. How could someone be so disconnected from the pain they caused? So cold in the face of their own children's deaths? Diane's strange behavior was also analyzed by professionals. Forensic psychologists who studied her interviews identified clear signs of personality disorders: extreme narcissism, a complete lack of empathy, pathological distortions of reality, and dangerous rationalizations. In essence, Diane seemed to be living in a parallel world, a version of events crafted to protect her ego, her image, and her fabricated innocence. Meanwhile, her biological daughter, Jennifer, was growing up unaware of the truth. But as always, the shadow of origin eventually returns. One day, Jennifer found out. She had been conceived during Diane's trial by a woman convicted of murdering her own children. The psychological impact was devastating. Jennifer had to face biological rejection, the cruelty of her origin, and the exposure of her story to the world. She became yet another victim of the emotional wreckage Diane left behind. And the media never let the story die. It fed on every detail. Movies were made, TV shows recreated the crime, and Small Sacrifices, the best-selling book by Anne Rule, became a hit miniseries in the 1990s. Diane became a symbol of the darkest distortion of motherhood, a woman who created life, but saw it as disposable. Even now, more than 40 years later, she remains imprisoned, still filing legal appeals, still writing letters, still denying everything. But to the world, the verdict is final. Diane Downs isn't remembered as a mother. She's remembered as the opposite of one, a cruel reminder that sometimes danger doesn't come from outside. It comes from the driver's seat, with a smile and a .22 caliber handgun. Diane Downs destroyed what many consider sacred, the maternal instinct, not with screams, not with rage, but with coldness, with calculation, with an absolute absence of remorse. Her name echoes in the records of the U.S. justice system as a silent warning. Not every monster hides in the dark. Some wear smiles and speak sweet words. She tried to rewrite the story, tried to convince the world that she was the victim. But the evidence, the bodies, the testimonies, they all told a different story. Today, locked inside a maximum security cell, Diane is nothing more than a shadow of the image she once tried to project. A woman who could have loved but chose to kill. And the question that still haunts us might be the most disturbing of all. Does she feel any remorse? Or does she, even now, believe she did the right thing in the name of twisted love? And what about you? Do you think someone like Diane Downs can ever truly change? Or are some souls just born condemned? If this story gave you chills or made you reflect on the limits of the human mind, consider subscribing to our channel. Every week we bring real, dark, and deeply human cases, always told with the respect victims deserve and the intensity truth demands. Leave a like, share this with others who are drawn to true crime, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Here, every case is told in depth, and every silence hides a new secret.